The stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet, as the Galactic Council station orbited peacefully in the neutral zone between 12 different alien territories. For thousands of years, the Council had maintained order in this part of the galaxy and brought together species from across the stars to share knowledge and maintain peace. The station itself was a marvel of engineering and stretched over 50 kilometers in diameter with docking bays that could accommodate vessels of all shapes and sizes. Inside the great halls and chambers, the representatives of 12 alien races conducted their business with the calm certainty of those who had never truly been challenged. Ambassador Zrel of the Velkron Empire stood in the observation deck and watched the empty space beyond with his 4 eyes, while his scales shifted from blue to a thoughtful purple. Next to him floated Chorus of Light from the Lithian Concordat, whose crystalline body refracted the station lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. Behind them, the insectoid commander Thrix clicked his mandibles softly and tasted the air with his antennae. They were waiting for the humans to arrive, and none of them knew quite what to expect from this new species. The humans had been discovered only 2 centuries ago, when the Council scout ships had found their small blue planet tucked away in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy. At that time, the humans had barely mastered flight and were still fighting wars among themselves with crude chemical weapons. The Council had placed the system under observation with the standard protocols and waited for the species to either destroy itself or mature enough to join galactic civilization. Most Council members had bet on destruction, but the humans had surprised everyone, and within 200 years they had not only survived but thrived in ways that defied the usual patterns of development. They had reached their moon and then pushed outward to the other planets in their system. They had built colonies on hostile worlds and learned to terraform barren rocks into gardens. Most surprisingly, they had cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel on their own without any guidance from the elder races. When their first colony ship had crossed the Council detection grid, the automated systems had sent an invitation immediately. Now the Council waited to see what sort of vessel the humans would send for first contact. The standard procedure was for a new species to arrive in a small diplomatic ship with perhaps a crew of 10 or 20 at most. The ship would be lightly armed if armed at all, because this was meant to be a peaceful introduction to the greater galactic community. Ambassador Zrel had seen 100 such arrivals in his long career, and expected this one to follow the same pattern. The detection sensors began to ping softly, and Chorus of Light pulsed with anticipation. Commander Thrix straightened his thorax and adjusted his ceremonial sash. A quantum tunnel was forming in space just beyond the station, and something large was about to emerge from faster-than-light travel. The 3 Council members watched their displays carefully and waited to welcome the newcomers. What came through the tunnel made Ambassador Zrel step back involuntarily, and his scales flash warning red. The ship that emerged was absolutely massive and stretched nearly 2 full kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was dark gray and seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. Along both sides ran rows upon rows of weapon ports that gleamed with barely contained menace. Armor plating thick enough to shrug off meteor strikes covered every surface. Massive engines at the rear glowed, with enough power to move a small moon. This was not a diplomatic vessel. The human warship moved with surprising grace for something so large, and its approach vectors showed a crew that knew exactly how to handle their vessel. As it drew closer, the full scale of the thing became even more apparent. Smaller ships that would have been considered cruisers by Council standards sat in external docking clamps along the hull. Point defense turrets tracked every piece of debris that floated nearby with mechanical precision. Sensor arrays that could probably map an entire solar system jutted from the superstructure like the quills of some enormous beast. Commander Thrix recovered first, and his translator unit crackled to life. The message he sent was meant to be welcoming, but his voice carried an edge of concern. He announced that the Galactic Council welcomed the humans and requested that they dock at Bay 7, which had been prepared for their arrival. The response came back in clear galactic standard, with only a slight accent that marked it as being translated from another language. The human who spoke identified himself as Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran naval ship Valor, and thanked the Council for their hospitality. His voice was calm and professional, but carried an undertone of confidence that made the aliens glance at each other nervously. The captain said his ship would comply with docking procedures, and requested permission to bring a small delegation aboard the station for initial talks. Ambassador Zrel granted permission with as much diplomatic warmth as he could muster, while his mind raced with implications. The Valor maneuvered toward the docking bay with thrusters that could have pushed asteroids out of orbit and settled into position with barely a tremor. Docking clamps engaged, and airlocks cycled. On the station side, the council representatives hurried to the reception hall and tried to compose themselves. This was not at all what they had expected, and the presence of such overwhelming military force at a diplomatic meeting sent a message that the humans either did not understand proper protocol or simply did not care about it. The airlock opened, and 4 humans stepped through into the station. They wore dark blue uniforms with silver insignia and moved with the easy confidence of trained military personnel. The one in front was clearly Captain Morrison, and he stood about average height for a human with short brown hair and sharp green eyes that took in every detail of his surroundings. Behind him came a woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun who carried herself like a fighter. Next was a man with graying temples and the weathered look of someone who had spent years in engine rooms. The last was younger with glasses and carried a data pad. Captain Morrison approached the council representatives and stopped at what he judged to be a respectful distance. He placed his right hand over his heart in what was apparently a human gesture of greeting and spoke in that same calm voice they had heard over the communication channel. He introduced himself properly and presented his officers, who were Lieutenant Sophie Blake as his tactical officer and Commander Ryan Hayes as his chief engineer, and Dr. Alan Foster as their specialist in alien languages and cultures. Ambassador Zrel recovered his diplomatic composure and welcomed them formally to the station. He introduced Chorus of Light and Commander Thrix, and explained that they represented 3 of the 12 council races. He said that the full council would convene in 1 hour to meet with the human delegation and discuss the possibility of Earth joining the galactic community. His words were polite, but his eyes kept drifting back to the massive warship visible through the viewport. Captain Morrison smiled slightly, as if he understood exactly what the ambassador was thinking. He said that he looked forward to the meeting and hoped that this would be the beginning of a long and prosperous relationship between humanity and the council. Sophie Blake added that they had brought extensive data about human culture and technology to share with the council as a gesture of good faith. Ryan Hayes mentioned that his engineers would be happy to discuss comparative technologies if the council was interested. Alan Foster simply nodded politely and made notes on his datapad. The council members escorted the humans to their quarters, which had been prepared according to the specifications that Earth had transmitted ahead of time. The rooms were comfortable if somewhat plain by council standards, with adjustable atmosphere and gravity to match human norms. Captain Morrison thanked them again and said his people would prepare for the formal meeting. As the council members departed, they could not help but glance back at the 4 humans who seemed completely at ease despite being surrounded by aliens on a station millions of kilometers from their home. Back in the observation deck, Ambassador Zrel watched the Valor through the viewport and tried to understand what the humans were thinking. Chorus of Light pulsed with confused amber light and wondered aloud if perhaps the humans had misunderstood the nature of the invitation. Commander Thrix clicked thoughtfully and suggested that perhaps this was simply how humans conducted diplomacy, by arriving in strength rather than vulnerability. Whatever the truth was, it had certainly gotten the council attention, and every representative would be watching the upcoming meeting very carefully indeed. The Grand Assembly Hall was designed to impress visitors, and it succeeded magnificently with its soaring ceiling that displayed a holographic map of the entire galaxy slowly rotating above the gathered delegates. The 12 council races each had their designated areas with environmental controls tailored to their specific needs. The Velcron section maintained higher humidity, while the Lithian area pulsed with harmonic frequencies that kept their crystalline bodies properly aligned. The Kareth occupied a raised platform where the temperature ran hot enough to make other species uncomfortable. Around the circular chamber sat representatives from the Nephrin, who existed as gaseous clouds in containment suits, and the Morphid, who constantly shifted between forms, and the other elder races who had maintained this council for millennia. Captain Jake Morrison entered the hall with his 3 officers, and every eye or sensor or other sensory organ focused on them immediately. The humans walked with measured steps, and their dark blue uniforms stood out sharply against the varied colors and forms of the alien delegates. Jake had attended enough high-level meetings on Earth to know how to present himself, and he kept his expression neutral, but not hostile, while his eyes took in every detail of the room, with the trained awareness of someone who had commanded ships in dangerous situations. Ambassador Zrel stood in the center of the chamber, and his translator began broadcasting in multiple frequencies to reach all the assembled species. He welcomed the humans formally and explained that this gathering would determine whether Earth would be invited to join the Galactic Council as a member species with all the rights and responsibilities that came with such membership. He said that the Council had observed Earth for 200 years and had watched humanity grow from a primitive world into a spacefaring civilization. Now it was time to meet face to face and discuss the future. Jake stepped forward when invited and introduced himself and his crew again for the benefit of those who had not been at the initial greeting. He thanked the Council for their invitation and said that humanity was honored to be considered for membership. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, and the translator units rendered his words into dozens of different languages simultaneously. He said that Earth came in peace but also in strength because that was the only way humanity knew how to engage with an unknown galaxy. This statement caused immediate reactions among the delegates. The Morphids shifted into aggressive postures, before settling back into neutral forms. The Nephrons swirled with colors that their species used to communicate displeasure. Chorus of light pulsed with rapid amber and red hues that indicated alarm. Ambassador Zrel raised one clawed hand and requested clarification about what Captain Morrison meant by coming in strength. Sophie Blake stepped forward slightly, and her voice was firm when she spoke. She said that the Valor was a warship, and they made no apologies for that fact. She explained that humanity had learned through thousands of years of hard experience that peace was something that had to be protected and defended. She said that Earth had sent a warship to this meeting not as a threat to the Council, but as a demonstration that humans would not be easy victims if hostile forces existed in the galaxy. Commander Thrix clicked his mandibles sharply, and his translator rendered it as harsh laughter. He said that the Council had maintained peace for 10,000 years without needing to resort to such crude displays of military force. He said that the elder races had evolved beyond war and settled their differences through diplomacy and mediation and mutual respect. He asked what made the humans think that their violent approach had any place in civilized space. Ryan Hayes responded to this, and his weathered face showed no emotion as he spoke. He said that he respected what the Council had accomplished, but noted that peace, maintained by equals, was different from peace imposed by strength. He asked whether the Council had truly evolved beyond war, or whether they had simply been fortunate enough to never face a serious external threat. He said that humanity had fought wars that nearly destroyed their entire species, and they carried those scars as reminders of what happened when civilizations became complacent. The chamber erupted in multiple languages, as delegates argued among themselves about this bold statement. Some found the human attitude refreshing, while others considered it dangerously primitive. The Velcron delegation conferred among themselves with their scales flashing through worried patterns. The Lithian group pulsed with discordant harmonics that indicated deep disagreement. The Kareth remained still, which was their way of showing that they were considering the words carefully. Ambassador Zrel called for order, and the chamber gradually quieted. He addressed Jake directly and asked whether humanity understood that joining the Council meant accepting its principles of peaceful coexistence. He said that while defensive preparations were acceptable, the Council could not accept a member species that glorified war or sought to impose its will through force. He said that the massive warship sitting in their docking bay sent a troubling message about human intentions. Jake looked around the chamber slowly before responding, and when he spoke, his voice was measured and thoughtful. He said that humanity did not glorify war, but neither did they hide from its reality. He said that every human child learned about the terrible wars of their past and studied the mistakes that had led to such destruction. He said the monuments on Earth were not celebrations of victory but reminders of the cost of violence. He said that the valor existed precisely because humans never wanted to repeat those mistakes and would do whatever necessary to prevent them. Alan Foster adjusted his glasses and spoke for the first time since entering the chamber. He said that he had studied the available data about Council history and noticed something interesting. He said that in 10,000 years of peace, the Council had never faced a major external threat. He asked what would happen if a hostile force appeared that could not be reasoned with or negotiated with, or convinced to follow council principles. He asked what the council would do if diplomacy failed. This question hung in the air uncomfortably, and the delegates shifted in their seats or containment fields. Chorus of Light finally pulsed with slow blue patterns, and admitted that the council maintained defensive fleets in case of such an occurrence. The being explained that each member species contributed ships to a collective defense force that could respond to pirates or raiders or other minor threats. However, Chorus of Light acknowledged that this force had never been tested against a peer-level adversary. Sophie Blake seized on this admission and asked to see specifications for the Council Defense Fleet. After some hesitation, Ambassador Zrel authorized the data transfer, and holographic displays appeared, showing the various ships that made up the Council military. The vessels were elegant and clearly built by advanced civilizations, but Jake could see immediately that they were designed primarily for patrol and peacekeeping rather than serious combat. The weapons were adequate for dealing with small criminal elements, but would struggle against dedicated warships. Ryan Hayes studied the displays with his engineer eye and commented that the Council ships were beautifully designed but lacked redundancy in critical systems. He pointed out that a single hit to the central power core on most Council vessels would disable the entire ship. He noted that armor was minimal because the designers had apparently never expected to face serious opposition. He said with respect that these were not warships but rather police vessels scaled up to operate in space. The Council members reacted to this assessment with varying degrees of offense and concern. The Nephron delegate demanded to know what gave humans the right to criticize designs that had served the Council well for millennia. Commander Thrix insisted that the lack of heavy weapons and armor was by design because Council ships were meant to protect, not to conquer. Ambassador Zrel tried to maintain diplomatic calm, but his scales had turned a deep, concerned purple. Jake raised his hand to request permission to speak, and when granted, he chose his words carefully. He said that humanity was not criticizing the Council choices, but rather pointing out a fundamental difference in philosophy. He said that Council ships reflected a civilization that had enjoyed peace for so long it had forgotten what war truly meant. He said that human ships like the Valor reflected a civilization that remembered every brutal lesson and built accordingly. He said neither approach was wrong, but they came from very different experiences. Chorus of Light pulsed thoughtfully and asked Jake to explain what specific lessons humanity had learned that influenced their ship designs. Jake glanced at Sophie and nodded for her to answer, since she was the tactical expert. Sophie brought up her own data pad and projected images of human warships through history, from wooden sailing vessels to modern spacecraft. She explained how each generation had learned from the previous one failures and incorporated those lessons into new designs. She showed them the submarines that taught humans about stealth and surprise. She showed them the aircraft carriers that proved mobile firepower could project force across vast distances. She showed them the space stations that demonstrated how to maintain operations in hostile environments. She explained that the Valor incorporated all these lessons, plus many more that humanity had paid for in blood and treasure. Alan Foster added that human military doctrine emphasized redundancy and survivability above almost everything else. He said that Valor could lose half its systems and still fight effectively. He said that human crews trained constantly for disaster scenarios and knew how to keep fighting even when badly damaged. He said this was not because humans were naturally violent, but because they had learned the hard way that enemies did not stop attacking just because you wanted them to. The chamber fell quiet as the Council members absorbed this information. They had never encountered a species quite like this one, that spoke of peace while building such fearsome weapons. The elder races had all followed similar paths of development and gradually reduced their military capabilities as they joined the Council and accepted its principles. The humans seemed to be suggesting a different path entirely, where peace was maintained through strength rather than in spite of it. Finally, a new voice spoke from the section reserved for the Draven Collective. The Draven were an aquatic species who communicated through complex color patterns on their skin and rarely participated in Council debates. Their representative now displayed patterns of deep blue and silver that the translators rendered as philosophical inquiry. The Draven asked whether humanity would be willing to demonstrate their capabilities in a practical test. Jake asked what sort of test the Draven had in mind. The representative explained that the Council maintained a weapons range in a nearby asteroid field, where new technologies were evaluated. Each Council species had demonstrated their defensive capabilities there when they first joined. The Draven suggested that humanity show what the Valor could do, so that the Council could make an informed decision about accepting such a heavily armed species into their ranks. Ambassador Zrel considered this suggestion and consulted briefly with the other senior delegates. After a few moments, he announced that the Council agreed to this proposal and invited Captain Morrison to demonstrate human weapons technology at the proving grounds. He said that each Council species would send observers, and the demonstration would be recorded for future reference. He asked whether the humans found this acceptable. Jake looked at his 3 officers and saw the slight smiles on their faces. They all knew that this was exactly the sort of opportunity they needed to make the Council understand what humanity brought to the table. Jake turned back to Ambassador Zrel and said that the crew of the Valor would be honored to demonstrate their capabilities, and hoped the Council found the results enlightening. The asteroid field, designated as the Council Proving Grounds, stretched across several thousand kilometers of space and contained rocks ranging from boulder-sized fragments to massive chunks of stone and iron that measured hundreds of meters across. The area had been used for weapons testing for over 5,000 years, and the debris from previous demonstrations drifted in slowly decaying orbits around the larger asteroids. Council ships took up observation positions at safe distances, while the station broadcast live feeds to all member species across the galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Valor with his command crew around him and watched the tactical displays that showed every ship and rock in the surrounding space. Sophie Blake sat at her tactical station and ran final checks on all weapon systems, while Ryan Hayes monitored power distribution from his engineering console. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft beeping of systems and the low conversations of crew members confirming readiness. Jake had commanded the Valor through training exercises and patrol missions, but this would be the first time they fired their weapons with an audience of alien civilizations watching their every move. Ambassador Zrel's voice came through the communication channel and explained the testing protocol. He said that the Council had designated a series of asteroids of increasing size for the demonstration. He said that previous species had used their primary weapons to destroy or disable these targets, and the Council would evaluate human capabilities based on similar criteria. He said that the Velcron had taken 30 seconds to vaporize a small asteroid with their plasma beam. He said that the Lithian had used harmonic resonance to shatter a medium-sized rock in under a minute. He said that the Kareth had deployed biomechanical drones that consumed a large asteroid over the course of several minutes. Jake listened to these descriptions and realized that the Council was thinking in terms of siege weapons and mining tools rather than true combat systems. The aliens were used to taking their time and applying overwhelming force to stationary targets that did not fight back. They had no experience with the kind of split-second decisions and rapid-fire exchanges that characterized human naval combat. He glanced at Sophie, who was already pulling up targeting solutions, and smiled slightly at her efficiency. He opened a channel to the Council observers and said that the Valor was ready to begin the demonstration. He said that in the interest of time, they would compress the testing sequence and engage multiple targets simultaneously. He said that human doctrine emphasized speed and overwhelming force applied precisely where it would do the most good. He asked the Council to select their largest test asteroid as the primary target. There was a pause while the Council delegates conferred, and then Ambassador Zrel designated an asteroid, roughly 400 meters in diameter, that floated near the center of the testing range. He noted that this was 3 times larger than the biggest target any previous species had attempted to destroy. He asked whether Captain Morrison was certain the Valor could handle such a challenge. Jake simply confirmed the target and ordered Sophie to prepare the main batteries. The Valor rotated smoothly on its maneuvering thrusters and presented its port side to the target asteroid. Along the hull, 48 individual weapon ports opened simultaneously, and massive railgun barrels extended into the vacuum. Inside, the ship capacitors charged with enough electricity to power a small city, and magnetic coils aligned with microscopic precision. Sophie coordinated the firing solution across all batteries and synchronized them to fire within microseconds of each other for maximum impact. Jake gave the order, and the Valor spoke with thunder, that had no sound in space. All 48 railguns fired as one and sent tungsten penetrator rounds screaming toward the target at a significant fraction of light speed. The projectiles crossed the distance in less than a second and struck the asteroid nearly simultaneously. The kinetic energy release was catastrophic and immediate. The asteroid did not shatter or crack or break apart slowly. It simply ceased to exist as a coherent object and transformed into an expanding cloud of superheated vapor and tiny fragments that glowed white-hot from the impact energy. The Council observation ships were silent. On the station, monitoring rooms across known space, alien viewers watched in stunned disbelief. Ambassador Zrell's scales had gone completely white with shock. Chorus of light pulsed with colors that had no name in the translation database. Commander Thrick's mandibles hung open in a way that was physically uncomfortable for his species. The silence stretched for several long seconds before anyone could formulate a response. Finally, Ambassador Zrell managed to speak, and his voice came through the channel with a tremor that the translator could not quite smooth out. He said that the Council had witnessed the demonstration and wanted to confirm the details. He asked how many weapons the Valor had just fired. Sophie Blake responded calmly that they had used 48 railguns, firing standard kinetic penetrators at nominal charge. She added that the ship carried several hundred such rounds per gun, plus various specialized munitions for different tactical situations. Chorus of Light found the ability to communicate and pulsed with rapid questioning colors. The being asked whether that was the full extent of human weapons capability, or if the Valor carried additional systems. Ryan Hayes answered this time and explained that the railguns were just one of several weapon types on the ship. He said they also had missile pods loaded with various warheads, including high explosive and armor-piercing and electronic warfare variants. He said they had point defense laser arrays designed to intercept incoming fire. He said they had experimental plasma cannons that were still being tested but showed promising results. The Draven representative who had suggested this demonstration now displayed patterns of deep concern mixed with what might have been respect. The being asked how long it would take the Valor to recharge and fire again. Sophie checked her displays and reported that the railguns could fire again immediately if needed because each battery had its own dedicated power supply. She said that sustained fire was possible for several minutes before heat buildup required a cooling cycle. She added that in actual combat, they would rotate batteries to maintain continuous fire indefinitely. Jake watched the Council ships on his tactical display and could see them repositioning to get better views of the expanding debris field. He knew what they were thinking because he had seen the same reaction from human observers during the Valor first test firing back in Earth orbit. The sheer scale of destructive power was difficult to process for species that had not fought serious wars in living memory. He opened a channel to all observers and asked if the Council wanted to see additional demonstrations, or if they had seen enough. Commander Thrix recovered enough to ask about defensive capabilities. He said that weapons were only part of ship design, and wanted to know how well the Valor could protect itself from similar attacks. Jake nodded to Ryan, who brought up the ship technical specifications and transmitted them to the Council observers. Ryan explained that the Valor armor was composite layered design, incorporating ablative outer plates over crystalline impact dispersal matrices over sealed hull compartments. He said the ship could take multiple direct hits from its own railguns and remain combat effective. The Morphid delegate shifted into a form that resembled a question mark and asked about the energy requirements for such systems. Ryan admitted that the Valor had massive power demands and explained that human engineers had developed fusion reactors specifically for military applications. He said the ship had 3 independent reactor cores, each capable of powering the entire vessel alone. He said that redundancy was built into every critical system because human experience showed that battles rarely went according to plan. Ambassador Zrell asked to speak privately with the other Council leaders, and Jake agreed to hold position while they conferred. The Valor drifted in space near the dissipating remains of the asteroid, while its crew waited patiently. On the bridge, Sophie reviewed the firing data and made notes about minor timing discrepancies in the battery synchronization. Ryan checked coolant levels and confirmed that all systems had performed within acceptable parameters. Alan Foster compiled information about Council reactions for his cultural database. After 10 minutes, the channel reopened, and Ambassador Zrel sounded even more shaken than before. He said that the council had discussed what they had witnessed and needed to understand human intentions more clearly. He said that the Valor represented a level of military power that exceeded anything currently in council space by a significant margin. He said that such power in the wrong hands could threaten the peace that had lasted for thousands of years. He asked Jake directly what humanity intended to do with ships like this. Jake had been expecting this question and had prepared his answer carefully. He said that humanity built ships like the Valor for exactly one purpose, which was to protect innocent lives from those who would do them harm. He said that Earth had no territorial ambitions beyond the colonies they had already established. He said that humans had no interest in conquering other species or imposing their will on others. He said that the Valor existed because human history taught that predators existed in any civilization and that someone had to be strong enough to stop them. Sophie added that human military doctrine was purely defensive in nature. She said that their tactical training emphasized protecting civilian populations and minimizing collateral damage. She said that every human officer spent years studying ethics and laws of war alongside their technical training. She said that the Valor crew included counselors and legal advisors specifically to ensure that force was only used when absolutely necessary and only to the degree required. Alan Foster pointed out that humanity had voluntarily shared all their weapons technology data with the Council as a gesture of good faith. He said that the specifications transmitted earlier included detailed schematics that the Council could study and verify. He said that Earth was not trying to hide anything or maintain military secrets from potential allies. He said this level of transparency should demonstrate that humans were genuinely interested in peaceful cooperation. Commander Thrix clicked thoughtfully and asked a question that cut to the heart of Council concerns. He asked what would happen if humanity decided to use their superior military power to dominate the Council, rather than join it as equals. He said that the elder races had no defense against weapons like those they had just witnessed. He said that the Council would essentially be trusting humanity to voluntarily restrain itself. Ryan Hayes responded with unexpected emotion in his voice. He said that he had served in the Earth Fleet for 30 years, and watched thousands of young men and women train to protect others. He said that human military culture was built on honor and sacrifice and duty. He said that officers who abused their power were court-martialed and imprisoned. He said that the human public maintained strict civilian control over the military precisely to prevent the kind of dictatorship Commander Thrix was worried about. Jake added that humanity understood the Council concern, but asked them to consider the alternative. He said that the galaxy was vast, and humanity had explored only a tiny fraction of it. He said that somewhere out there might be threats that the Council had never encountered simply because they had been lucky so far. He said that when such threats appeared, the Council would need allies who could fight rather than just negotiate. He said that humanity was offering to be that ally. Chorus of Light pulsed with slow contemplative patterns and asked whether humanity had encountered such threats themselves. Jake exchanged glances with his officers before answering carefully. He said that Earth had detected strange signals from deep space that suggested the presence of other civilizations beyond Council territory. He said that some of these signals showed technological signatures that were concerning. He said that humanity had begun building ships like the Valor specifically because they suspected the galaxy was more dangerous than it appeared. This revelation caused another wave of concerned reactions from the Council observers. The Nephrin delegates swirled with agitated colors and demanded to know why humanity had not shared this information earlier. Alan Foster explained that Earth had only fragmentary data and did not want to cause unnecessary alarm without more evidence. He said that human scientists were still analyzing the signals and trying to determine their origin and intent. He said that one of humanity's goals in joining the Council was to compare notes and see if any elder races had similar data. Ambassador Zrel processed all this information and finally made a decision. He said that the Council would need more time to discuss these matters internally, but that the demonstration had been enlightening. He said that humanity had certainly proven their military capabilities beyond any doubt. He said that the Council would reconvene tomorrow to continue discussions about Earth membership. He thanked Captain Morrison for his candor and cooperation. Jake acknowledged this and ordered the Valor back to its docking berth. As the great warship turned away from the testing grounds, the council observers remained in position and watched the debris field slowly expand. They were thinking about what they had seen and what it meant for the future of their civilization. For 10,000 years, they had maintained peace through mutual cooperation and careful diplomacy. Now a new species had arrived that offered a different kind of peace maintained through overwhelming strength and the will to use it. The question facing the council was whether they should embrace this new paradigm or reject it and hope their old ways continued to work in an increasingly uncertain galaxy. 3 days had passed since the weapons demonstration, and the council had been locked in continuous debate about how to handle the human question. Captain Jake Morrison and his officers had been given comfortable quarters on the station and allowed to move freely through the public areas where they encountered dozens of different alien species who regarded them with mixtures of curiosity and concern. The humans took advantage of this time to learn about council culture and establish informal contacts with various delegates who were willing to talk off the record. Sophie Blake had spent hours with the Karath military advisors discussing tactical doctrine and found their hive-mind approach to combat coordination fascinating, if ultimately incompatible with human command structures. Ryan Hayes had exchanged technical data with Lithian engineers, and both sides had come away impressed by the different solutions they had developed for similar problems. Alan Foster had compiled an enormous database of cultural information that would keep Earth anthropologists busy for years. Jake himself had met privately with several ambassadors who wanted to understand human intentions without the formal constraints of official council sessions. On the evening of the third day, Jake was reviewing reports in his quarters when alarms began blaring throughout the station. The sound was unlike anything he had heard before and carried a note of genuine panic that made him immediately grab his communicator and contact the Valor. Sophie's voice came back tense and focused as she reported that something had just emerged from deep space on a fast approach vector. She said the council sensors had detected it first, and their ships were scrambling to observation positions. She said the energy signature was massive and unlike anything in the council database. Jake ran toward the nearest observation deck and arrived to find it already crowded with aliens who were watching displays showing the approaching contact. Ambassador Zrel was there with his scales flickering through distressed patterns, and Commander Thrix stood rigid with his antennae locked forward in combat alertness. Chorus of light pulsed with rapid, chaotic colors that indicated fear or extreme agitation. Jake pushed through to get a clear view of the main display, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The ship approaching the station was enormous and easily 5 times the size of the Valor. Its hull was organic-looking and seemed to writhe and pulse with some kind of internal movement. Tentacles or cables or something similar trailed behind it and glowed with sickly green luminescence. The surface appeared to be covered in some kind of biological armor that shifted and flowed like living tissue. Energy readings spiked off the scale as the thing accelerated toward them with obvious hostile intent. Ambassador Zrel was speaking rapidly into multiple communication channels trying to coordinate a response. He ordered all civilian vessels to evacuate immediately and called up the Council Defense Fleet to intercept. He sent emergency broadcasts to all member worlds, warning them of an unknown hostile. His voice carried the edge of someone who had spent thousands of years in comfortable peace and suddenly found himself facing real danger for the first time. Commander Thrix turned to Jake, and his mandibles clicked rapidly in what the translator rendered as desperate inquiry. He said that council records mentioned something called the Devourers, which were supposed to be ancient legends told to young ones as cautionary tales. He said that the descriptions matched what they were seeing, but no one had believed such things actually existed. He said that according to the stories, the Devourers appeared every few thousand years to consume entire worlds and nothing could stop them. Jake was already moving back toward the communications station and opened a channel to the Valor. He ordered Sophie to bring all systems online and prepare for combat operations. He told Ryan to get the reactors to maximum output and route power to weapons and shields. He told the crew to sound general quarters and get every Marine to their battle stations. Sophie acknowledged, and he could hear the controlled chaos in the background as 300 crew members scrambled to prepare their ship for battle. Chorus of light pulsed with amber warning colors and said that the Council standing orders for situations like this were clear. The being said that all ships were to evacuate and retreat to safe distance while automated defenses engaged. The being said that the Council had learned long ago that preservation of life took priority over defending territory. The being said that they should abandon the station and flee while they still could. Jake stared at the Lithian delegate and asked how many beings were currently on the station. Ambassador Zrel answered that there were approximately 10,000 individuals, including council, staff, and civilian workers, and visiting diplomats from hundreds of worlds. Jake asked how long it would take to evacuate that many people through the available ships. The ambassador did some quick calculations and said it would require at least 2 hours to load everyone safely. The tactical display updated and showed that the hostile vessel would reach weapons range of the station in approximately 90 minutes. Jake looked at the Council defense fleet and counted 23 ships of various sizes moving to intercept. He pulled up their specifications and shook his head at what he saw. The Council ships were designed for patrol and peacekeeping with minimal armor and weapons that were adequate for dealing with pirates but completely insufficient for fighting something like the monstrosity bearing down on them. Sophie's voice came through his communicator asking for orders. The Valor was ready for combat, but she wanted to know what their mission parameters were. Jake looked around the observation deck at the aliens who were evacuating in organized panic. He looked at the families with young ones and the elderly beings who moved slowly and the workers who were trying to help everyone get to the escape vessels. He made a decision that he knew might cost him his ship and his crew, but that he also knew was the only choice his conscience would allow. He told Sophie that their mission was to buy time for the evacuation. He said that the Valor would engage the hostile and keep it occupied while the civilians escaped. He said that they needed to hold for 2 hours minimum and preferably longer. He said that he knew what he was asking and that any crew member who objected would be allowed to transfer to an evacuation ship with no questions asked or repercussions. He waited for her response. There was a brief pause before Sophie came back and her voice was steady. She said that she had relayed his orders to the crew and asked for volunteers to transfer off. She said that not a single person had moved toward the airlocks. She said that the crew of the Valor understood what they were being asked to do and accepted it. She said that they were all military personnel who had sworn oaths to protect the innocent, and this was what that oath meant. She said that the ship was ready and waiting for his command. Jake felt pride and fear and determination wash through him in equal measure. He told Sophie that he was on his way back to the ship and would take command from the bridge. He turned to Ambassador Zrel and told him to get the evacuation moving as fast as possible. He said that the Valor would hold the line until everyone was safe, or until they could not hold any longer. He said that he hoped the Council would remember what humanity stood for when this was over. Ambassador Zrel's scales had shifted to a deep purple that indicated profound respect mixed with sorrow. He said that the Council would indeed remember, and that if humanity survived this day, they would have earned their place among the elder races through blood and courage. He said that he was sorry that first contact had led to this. He said that he hoped they would meet again. Jake ran through the corridors toward the docking bay, and his mind was already running through tactical scenarios. The hostile vessel was larger and probably more powerful than the Valor, but it was also a single ship against a warship designed for combat. The Council defense fleet would engage first and might inflict some damage before being overwhelmed. The Valor would then have to hold alone until the evacuation was complete. 2 hours against an enemy they knew nothing about except that it had inspired terror in civilizations that had existed for thousands of years. He reached the Valor airlock and cycled through quickly. The interior was already configured for battle stations with damage control teams positioned at key junctions and medical preparing for casualties. He made his way to the bridge and dropped into his command chair. Sophie had the tactical display, showing the entire battle space, with the hostile marked in red and the friendly forces in various shades of blue. The Council ships were moving to intercept in a standard defensive formation that would be torn apart in seconds. Ryan reported that all reactors were at full power and all systems were green. The weapons were charged and ready. The shields were at maximum strength. The ship could fight at peak efficiency for at least 6 hours before needing to reduce output. Jake acknowledged this and opened a channel to the Council Defense Fleet commander. He introduced himself and asked what their battle plan was. The fleet commander was a Nephrin named Flow of Courage, whose gaseous form swirled with determined colors inside the containment suit. The being said that the fleet would attempt to disable the hostile with coordinated plasma fire, and then fall back if unsuccessful. The being said that they had never fought anything like this before, and were working from theoretical doctrine that had never been tested. The being asked if Captain Morrison had any suggestions. Jake studied the tactical situation and made rapid calculations based on what he could see. He said that the Council ships should focus on the tentacles or appendages trailing behind the hostile vessel. He said that those might be sensor arrays or weapons or engine components, and disrupting them could slow the enemy down. He said that the Valor would hold back initially and observe the enemy capabilities before committing. He said that they needed to learn how this thing fought before they could develop effective countermeasures. Flow of Courage agreed to this plan, and the Council fleet adjusted their formation accordingly. The hostile vessel continued its relentless approach and was now close enough that visual sensors could make out details on its surface. The organic armor seemed to pulse and breathe, and occasionally opened to reveal weapon ports that glowed with that same sickly green energy. Smaller organisms or machines crawled across the hull in patterns that suggested some kind of maintenance or preparation activity. The Council fleet opened fire at maximum range with plasma beams and particle weapons and missile volleys. The coordinated barrage lit up space with brilliant flashes of energy, as weapons that could vaporize asteroids struck the hostile armor. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The armor absorbed most of the impact, and what little damage penetrated was already regenerating before the next volley arrived. The organic hull flowed like liquid to seal breaches and repair damage faster than the Council weapons could inflict it. The hostile vessel returned fire with those green energy weapons, and the bolts that emerged were unlike anything in Council experience. When they struck Council shields, the energy seemed to eat through the defensive fields like acid. When they hit armor, the metal corroded and failed within seconds. 3 Council ships took direct hits, and their hulls began to dissolve as the corrosive energy spread across their surfaces. Crew members evacuated in escape pods, while their vessels came apart around them. Sophie watched the engagement with focused intensity and analyzed every detail. She noted that the hostile fire rate was relatively slow, which suggested either limited power generation or perhaps some kind of biological recharge cycle. She noted that the regeneration speed varied across the hull, with some areas healing faster than others. She noted that the tentacles trailing behind seemed to glow brighter when the main weapons fired, which might indicate they were part of the power distribution system. Jake made his decision and ordered the Valor forward into weapons range. He told Sophie to target those tentacles with everything they had and keep firing until something broke. He told Ryan to keep the shields cycling through different frequencies to see if any configuration resisted the corrosive energy better than others. He told the crew to brace for impact because they were about to find out just how tough their ship really was. The Valor accelerated toward the hostile vessel, with its engines burning at full thrust, and closed the distance in seconds. Sophie had already calculated firing solutions for all 48 railguns and synchronized them to target the glowing tentacles that trailed behind the enemy ship. The capacitors charged with that familiar hum that every crew member had learned to recognize, and when Jake gave the order, the ship unleashed its opening salvo. Tungsten rounds screamed through space at relativistic velocities and struck the tentacles with devastating force. The organic material shattered and exploded where the projectiles hit, and green fluid that might have been blood or coolant or something else entirely sprayed into the vacuum. 3 of the tentacles were severed completely and drifted away, trailing sparks and twitching with residual energy. The hostile vessel shuddered from the impact, and its forward momentum slowed noticeably. The enemy responded immediately by rotating to bring its main weapons to bear on this new threat that had actually hurt it. 6 of those corrosive green energy bolts lanced out toward the Valor and struck the forward shields with enough force to make the entire ship shake. Ryan had been cycling the shield frequencies as ordered, and found that higher frequency settings seemed to resist the corrosive effect slightly better than standard configurations. The shields held, but power drain was significant, and he rerouted energy from non-essential systems to compensate. Sophie did not wait for orders and kept up continuous fire with the railguns while simultaneously launching missiles from the port pods. The missiles were equipped with high explosive warheads, designed to fragment and spread shrapnel across a wide area. When they detonated near the hostile hull, The fragments peppered the organic armor and created hundreds of small impacts that the regeneration system struggled to heal all at once. It was like overwhelming a healing factor by inflicting too many wounds simultaneously. Jake watched the tactical display and saw that the remaining council ships had broken off their attack and were moving to support the evacuation. The hostile vessel had turned its full attention to the Valor now, and that was exactly what he wanted. Every second the enemy spent fighting his ship was another second for civilians to escape. He opened a channel to the station and asked for evacuation status. Ambassador Zrel reported that they had loaded 60% of the personnel and needed at least another hour. The Valor and the hostile vessel circled each other like ancient predators testing for weaknesses. The human warship was faster and more maneuverable, while the alien monstrosity was larger and seemed nearly indestructible. Every time Sophie inflicted damage, the organic hull would flow and regenerate to repair itself. Every time the enemy landed a hit on the Valor shields, the power reserves dropped, and Ryan had to perform miracles of engineering to keep the defensive systems operational. Alan Foster had been monitoring the enemy energy signatures from his science station and noticed something interesting in the data. He reported that every time the hostile vessel regenerated damage, there was a spike in power consumption that came from somewhere deep inside the hull. He said that the regeneration was not free, but required enormous amounts of energy drawn from some kind of core or reactor. He said that if they could force the enemy to regenerate faster than it could generate power, they might be able to overwhelm its systems. Sophie immediately understood the implications and adjusted her targeting priorities. Instead of trying to inflict catastrophic damage, she began spreading fire across multiple areas of the hull simultaneously. She used the railguns on one section, while missiles hit another, and the experimental plasma cannons that Ryan had been holding in reserve opened up on a third area. The hostile vessel was suddenly dealing with damage across 20 different locations, and its regeneration began to slow as it struggled to allocate resources. The enemy seemed to realize what was happening and changed tactics. It stopped trying to destroy the Valor outright, and instead began launching smaller organisms, or machines, or possibly both from ports that opened across its hull. Hundreds of these things swarmed toward the human warship, trailing those same green energy signatures. They were each about the size of a fighter craft, and moved with disturbing organic fluidity through space. Jake had trained for swarm attacks and knew the standard countermeasures. He ordered the point defense laser arrays to engage, and the Valor bristled with dozens of smaller weapons that tracked and fired with computer precision. The lasers could not miss at these ranges, and every shot that connected vaporized one of the small attackers in a flash of superheated tissue. But there were so many of them, and they kept coming in waves that seemed endless. Some of the swarm organisms got through the defensive fire and latched onto the Valor hull. They began secreting that corrosive green substance, and the outer armor started to fail where they attached. Damage control teams in pressure suits went outside with cutting tools and literally pried the things off the hull before they could eat through to critical systems. It was brutal, close-quarters combat fought in vacuum with improvised weapons against enemies that had no concept of surrender. Ryan reported that shield power was down to 60% and dropping fast. The continuous bombardment from the main hostile vessel, combined with the swarm attacks, was draining their reserves faster than the reactors could replenish them. He said that if they continued at this rate, they would lose shields completely within 30 minutes. He asked permission to shut down one reactor and perform an emergency overload that would give them a massive temporary power boost at the cost of permanently damaging that reactor. Jake authorized it because 30 minutes was not enough time and they needed every advantage they could get. Ryan executed the procedure with the kind of casual competence that came from decades of experience. He shut down Reactor 2 and began feeding its fuel directly into Reactor 1 at rates that exceeded every safety parameter. Power output spiked dramatically, and Sophie suddenly had enough energy to fire every weapon simultaneously at maximum charge. The Valor became a sphere of destruction that filled space with railgun rounds and missiles and plasma and laser fire in every direction. The hostile vessel staggered under the assault, and its regeneration could not keep pace with the overwhelming damage. Chunks of organic armor broke away and drifted into space. Entire sections of the hull went dark as internal systems failed. The swarm organisms stopped launching as the ship devoted all its energy to survival and self-repair. But the enemy was not finished, and demonstrated why it had terrified civilizations for millennia. From deep inside its core, a new weapon activated, and space itself seemed to distort around the hostile vessel. A beam of pure gravitational force lanced out and struck the Valor amidships with enough power to crumple solid metal like paper. The ship groaned and twisted as structural members failed and compartments decompressed. Alarms shrieked across every deck as the crew fought to contain the damage. Jake felt the deck tilt under his feet and grabbed his chair to keep from falling. He demanded damage reports and got back a litany of failures from across the ship. The port missile pods were completely destroyed. 3 of the railgun batteries were offline. The plasma cannons had overheated and shut down automatically. Worst of all, the gravitational weapon had damaged the hull enough that sections of the ship were now exposed to vacuum. Sophie reported casualties, and Jake closed his eyes briefly as she listed the dead and injured. 30 crew members had been in the sections that decompressed, and not all of them had survived. Another 40 were injured to varying degrees and being treated in medical. But 230 people were still at their stations, and still fighting, because that was what humans did when pushed to the edge. Ryan managed to get the artificial gravity back online after some creative rerouting, and reported that the overloaded reactor was approaching critical failure. He said they had maybe 10 minutes before it went into meltdown, and they would have to jettison it. He said that would cut their remaining power by a third, and they would lose the ability to maintain full shields. He asked what the captain wanted to do. Jake looked at the tactical display and saw that the hostile vessel was also clearly damaged and struggling. Its regeneration had slowed to a crawl, and large sections of its hull showed no activity at all. The swarm organisms had stopped completely. The gravitational weapon had not fired again, which suggested it required time to recharge or had expended its available power. Both ships were hurt badly, and the question was which one would break first. Alan Foster suddenly spoke up with excitement in his voice. He said that he had been analyzing the power consumption data and found something critical. He said that the hostile vessel was drawing power from multiple sources, but one of them showed a distinct pattern that matched a biological fusion process. He said that there was a specific area deep inside the ship where all the energy flows converged, and if they could hit that spot, they might be able to trigger a cascade failure that would destroy the entire vessel. Sophie immediately requested the coordinates and began calculating firing solutions. The problem was that the target was buried deep inside the hull, behind layers of organic armor and damaged structure. A conventional shot would never penetrate far enough to reach it. They needed something with enough power to punch through everything and strike at the heart of the enemy ship. Jake made a decision that would either save them or kill them all. He ordered Ryan to redirect every remaining ounce of power into the forward railguns and remove all safety limiters. He told Sophie to synchronize all functional batteries and prepare to fire every gun simultaneously at the coordinates Alan had provided. He told the crew to brace for impact because the recoil from this shot would probably tear the Valor apart, but if they did not try, they would die anyway. Ryan protested that removing the limiters would burn out the magnetic coils and possibly cause the capacitors to explode. Jake acknowledged this and said to do it anyway. Ryan hesitated only a moment before complying and began the most dangerous procedure of his career. Power flowed into the railgun systems at levels they were never designed to handle. Warning lights turned red across the weapons board. Metal groaned. Under stress, it could not sustain indefinitely. Sophie locked in the targeting solution and counted down from 5. When she reached 0, every functional railgun on the Valor fired as one, in a shot that represented everything the ship had left to give. The tungsten rounds left the barrels at velocities that approached the theoretical maximum for magnetic acceleration. The recoil was enormous, and the Valor tumbled backward, as if struck by a giant hand. Several of the gun barrels shattered from the stress and vented atmosphere into space, but the projectiles reached their target. The rounds struck the hostile vessel and punched through the weakened armor like it was paper. They penetrated deep into the organic structure and found that critical power core that Alan had identified. When the tungsten hit the biological fusion process, something catastrophic happened. Energy that should have been contained suddenly was not, and began cascading through the ship systems faster than any safety mechanism could contain it. The hostile vessel seemed to swell from within as internal pressure built beyond tolerance levels. Cracks appeared across the hull and leaked light that should never be seen with unprotected eyes. The enemy ship was dying, and it died violently. The hull ruptured in dozens of places simultaneously, and then the entire vessel exploded in a flash that temporarily outshone the nearby sun. Debris and organic matter and strange green fluid sprayed across thousands of kilometers of space in an expanding sphere of destruction. The Valor drifted powerless and tumbling slowly, while its surviving crew tried to process what had just happened. They had done the impossible and destroyed an enemy that legends said could not be killed, but the cost had been high and the ship was barely holding together. Jake pulled himself upright, using his command chair, and started asking for status reports from departments that might not exist anymore. Ryan reported that Reactor 2 had indeed gone into meltdown and been jettisoned automatically. Reactor 1 was operating at minimal capacity and providing just enough power for life support and emergency systems. Reactor 3 had been damaged by the recoil but was still functional at reduced output. They had power but not enough to move the ship or fight if another enemy appeared. Sophie reported that 36 of the 48 railguns were destroyed or offline. All missile pods were empty or damaged beyond use. The plasma cannons would need complete replacement. Point defense lasers were at 20% capacity. The Valor could not fight its way out of a minor skirmish, let alone another major battle. Medical reported 73 dead and 112 injured. That was nearly half the crew killed or wounded in a battle that had lasted less than 1 hour. The survivors were exhausted and traumatized, but they had held the line and done what they set out to do. Jake opened a channel to the station, and his voice was rough when he asked for evacuation status. Ambassador Zrel responded immediately, and his scales were brilliant gold, which apparently indicated joy and profound relief. He said that the last civilian transport had departed 10 minutes ago and everyone was safe. He said that the Council had monitored the entire battle and bore witness to what humanity had done. He said that no words could adequately express their gratitude. The Council ships that had evacuated began returning and immediately offered assistance to the crippled Valor. They brought medical teams and engineers and supplies and anything else the humans needed. Flow of Courage brought the Nephron vessel alongside and established an airlock connection so injured crew could be transferred to better medical facilities. The Karath sent work crews to help with emergency repairs. The Lithian used their harmonic abilities to stabilize damaged hull sections until proper repairs could be made. Ambassador Zrel himself came aboard the Valor and made his way to the bridge, where Jake still sat in his command chair, refusing to leave his post until he knew his ship was secure. The Velkron ambassador approached slowly, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was speaking for the entire council. He said that the council had gathered in emergency session and reached a unanimous decision. He said that humanity had proven beyond any doubt that they deserved a place among the elder races. He said that the Valor and its crew had demonstrated courage and sacrifice and determination that reminded the council of virtues they had forgotten. He said that humanity was not joining the council as junior members or as equals, but as something more important, which was as protectors and defenders of all council worlds. He said that the council recognized that their 10,000 years of peace had made them soft and unprepared for the real dangers that existed in the galaxy. He said that the Devourers had been dismissed as legend precisely because no one wanted to believe such threats were real. He said that humanity had reminded them that peace was not the natural state of the universe but something that had to be defended by those strong enough and brave enough to stand against the darkness. Jake listened to this and felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He said that humanity accepted the council invitation and would stand with them against whatever threats might come. He said that Earth would begin building more ships, like the Valor, and training more crews who understood what it meant to protect the innocent. He said that he hoped they would never need to fight another battle like this one, but if they did, humanity would be ready. Ambassador Zrel placed one clawed hand on Jake's shoulder in a gesture of respect that crossed species boundaries. He said that the council would remember this day and tell the story of the Valor to future generations. He said that humanity had arrived in the galaxy like a storm and changed everything with their presence. He said that the elder races had much to learn from these newcomers, who remembered how to fight. In the weeks and months that followed, the Valor was repaired and retrofitted with new weapons, incorporating both human and council technology. The crew received medals and honors from a dozen different worlds. Captain Jake Morrison became something of a legend among the alien species who had witnessed what his ship had done. But more importantly, the Council began to change its approach to defense and security, with humanity leading the way. More human warships arrived to patrol Council space and train Allied forces in combat doctrine. Human Marines established bases on key worlds to provide rapid response to threats. Human engineers helped upgrade Council defensive systems with lessons learned from the battle. The galaxy would never be completely safe, but it was safer because humanity had arrived and refused to let the innocent suffer. And when future threats emerged, as they inevitably would, the Council had allies who understood that some things were worth fighting for, and some lines could not be crossed without consequences. The age of comfortable peace was over, but in its place came something stronger, which was peace maintained by those willing to stand and fight when necessary. This was humanity's gift to the stars, and the reason they had built ships like the Valor in the first place.